Hey everyone, this is Robert with goldsilverpros.com, and today I have a very special guest, my good friend Kai Hoffmann, who's CEO of Soar Financial Group and also of OrenInc. Kai, how are you doing today?
Yeah, Robert, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. You and I first met a couple years ago. We went on a mine tour for Northern Vertex out there in Arizona and had quite a good time. And I know at that time you were doing a lot of investment research into different companies, and then you took over OrenInc. So if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit about your background with SOAR and with OrenInc as well.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And I started Soar Financial back in 2011. It was a great time to start a company. Had 3 fantastic months, and then everything went to pieces. In the meantime, built a business, did a lot of roadshows, conferences, networking. And in 2016, I bought OrenInc, the data company. We track financings in the space. And we used to write a newsletter starting 2011 or 2012, actually, called The Investor Magazine. We stopped writing that newsletter in 2018. Perfect timing. Unfortunately, the market was just turning around. It's still up and running, so people can still check our track record, which I'm still quite proud of. We had early recommendations in West Dome, Kirkland Lake, and others as well that we recommended early. But it was more of an 80-20 rule. You got to focus on where you can actually make some money. And it was a free newsletter. Companies didn't sponsor us, so we stopped that newsletter, and we focused more on Soar Financial and OrenInc itself.
Okay. So talking a little bit about what you do with Soar Financial.
Yeah, so Soar Financial is more of a communications company, and that's Soar Financial Partners. We take companies out on the road. Unfortunately, not as much right now. We switched to virtual. One thing we're quite successful with, actually, is our SF Live format on Twitter, where we interview company CEOs live on Twitter and put that out. Viewership is great. Feedback has been tremendous because it's live, direct, and straight from the hip. We don't go through boring presentations like a webinar, which still has its own reason for being there. Webinar is just a different format, and we adapt it nicely. And OrenInc is sort of part of that Soar Financial Group umbrella. We track financings of close to 1,400 companies. We've tracked over 34,000 deals, I think it's right now. Just doing the math in my head. And we track companies on TSX, TSXV, CSE. And really important is our criteria. We don't track companies with a market cap over $1.5 billion or financings over $100 million. So Cisco Mining, for example, closed a $177 million Flowthrough bought deal earlier this week. You won't see that one show up in our numbers.
Okay. Is there any reason for having that cutoff? Are you just trying to focus on the junior market, or what's the reason for that?
Exactly what you said. It's the junior market, because one of those deals completely screws up our metrics. One thing that makes OrenInc a bit unique is the OrenInc index, where we track and come out with a weekly score of how the market is doing. And we're benchmarking it back to January 2011. That's our 100 level. And we try to see how we're doing, because January 2011 was extremely flat.
Yeah, it's when we had the peak in the gold price, and it seems like we had most of the financing. And I noticed I was doing a little bit of a presentation on financing in the miner space, and I was using some of your charts during that presentation recently. And it seems as though from 2011 to about early this year, I think the index went all the way down to something like 33 print in February or March. So there's not a lot of money coming into the junior resource space. Is there money now coming into it? Has that recovered over the last few months?
Oh, it definitely has. It definitely has. And the good thing is it's trickling down to the juniors now, the grassroots exploration companies. So,
okay.
We're seeing more financings that are more meaningful and actually create shareholder value, not just G&A financings.
Okay. Can you explain a couple of examples of the types of deals you've seen lately?
Yeah, good question. We've seen quite a few types of deals. Good putting me on the spot there. We haven't seen too many M&A or strategic investments yet. That's maybe worth pointing out. We've seen companies, and I mean majors or mid-tiers, top up maybe their positions or just a pro rata, but we haven't seen a lot of new strategic financings or investments. Agnico invested into Rupert Resources. Yamana's put in some money into Monarch, but then it gets very thin. I think I counted 5 or 6 that are proper strategic investments that were new, that were not hidden in a regular financing. Okay. Other than that, I'm a director of Labrador Gold, so maybe that as an example. I'm obviously biased talking about it, but we're a grassroots exploration company. We just picked up some assets, and our financing right now is oversubscribed. We're full, which is fantastic. That's why we've upsized it a couple times already. But we're grassroots, and it's really good to see that a grassroots explorer actually can raise that type of money.
Yeah, no, that's good news. And I've heard you talk about flow-through financing before. A lot of people don't really understand that term. Can you explain what flow-through financing is, and are we seeing a lot more of that recently in 2020?
We've seen actually a little less because there's certain uncertainty around flow-through, and let me get back to that. But flow-through is a Canadian thing. Like, unfortunately, you Americans don't have access to it unless you come in on the back end. And flow-through is a tax scheme, sort of, for Canadian investors, where you can actually write off your investments versus the costs of the companies. An exploration company doesn't have revenues, but they generate costs, and they can't write off the tax benefits there. But you as an investor can. Hence, the companies are allowed to place shares at a premium, and the investor gets to write that premium off, and sometimes a 30-40% discount, depends on the province and territory. Unfortunately, Americans don't have access to direct flow-through, but you have access to the back end of charity flow-through. But charity flow-through, you Americans have access to. So charity flow-through is a bit different. A big investor buys stock, flow-through stock in a company, donates it directly to a charity, and that charity sells it then to other investors. That's called, and they're the back-end investors.
Gotcha. Oh, interesting scheme. I'd never heard of that one before. Okay.
Yeah, and the premiums for charity flow-through are even higher than for regular flow-through. And charity flow-through offers a really interesting way for Canadian companies with projects in Canada to finance with less dilution.
Okay. So do you track where the money's coming from? For example, when I was at PDAC earlier this year, a lot of the people were mentioning that the U.S. money was starting to come into the resource sector, but they weren't seeing Canadian money, which I found odd. Is that what you're seeing in the numbers, or where would you say the money's coming from?
That's a good question, because we don't track exactly, because we track press releases. Like we don't call the companies up, say who's investing, and they don't send out the list. Unless it's press released, we really don't know who's putting the money up. Like Eric Sprott is an easy one to track because everybody's happy to announce Eric Sprott investment because there's still a bit of a marketing cliche or marketing effect attached to it. Unless it's like a bought deal underwritten by certain banks, we don't even know what bank is involved. If there's one involved. So that's a bit tricky. When we talk to companies, as I said before, like we're doing SF Live interviews, I've talked to 54 CEOs over the last 3 months on a daily basis. So we ask about generalist interest, and it seems to be slowly coming back. And some of the companies have recently done financings, and there's the odd generalist investor that's coming back into those placements.
Yeah, I definitely write for a couple of generalist magazines, one of those being Seeking Alpha, which is pretty big here in the States. And it does seem that there's a little bit more generalist interest towards especially precious metals, but the resources, but I still don't, I haven't seen just an enormous amount of interest coming back into it. So from my perspective, I think there's still a lot of growth into resources that we could still, yet to have, especially as we get into this really old stock and bond market. I think hopefully people will come back into resources. It seems to be cyclical. What are your thoughts on that?
It seems so, and everything points the right direction. There's like I've been saying for years that we need a bit of a scare in the main markets. We're slowly seeing that. We've seen that maybe in March, quite a bit of a scare where you have to scare the 401k money. You can't promise 20% returns in the S&P every year, right? So at one point, to secure your retirement, you might have to go increase the risk level because maybe 5% a year doesn't cut it anymore, right? And the S&P will correct, and the Dow Jones will correct. It'll happen. Like we're just headed that way. I'm not a macroeconomist. Like there are many more different experts on that matter, but I see things trending the wrong direction in the main markets and gold or the junior mining market or the mining sector in general. Even the big ones are nice opportunities.
Yeah, I do track macroeconomics quite a bit. It's what I write about a lot, and I agree with you. I think eventually it's going to revert to the mean. I think we've swung way too far in one direction. I think the fundamentals are pointing towards that, so I do agree with you on that front. Going back to Soar for a moment, can you take us through what is a day in the life of you at Soar? What exactly do you guys do, and do you help facilitate deals for people, or what is your focus there?
That's a good question, because fortunately, and that's one of the reasons I actually love my job, not every day is the same, right? So we have a quite diverse group of clients that we work with on a daily basis across different commodities. We got gold, silver, copper companies as clients. What we do is we facilitate outreach. We introduce them to newsletter writers, journalists, investors. We don't facilitate financings per se, but we open the right doors for them. So
I got you. Yeah, that seems to be a big challenge. I know, especially in the niche space of the precious metals, it's often hard to connect the investors with the companies. And lots of companies are looking for, what I get a lot of calls from companies is to help connect them to investors or help get them into the mainstream. And that seems to be what they're struggling with.
Maybe you can jump in there real quick, because I used to live in Frankfurt and I only moved to Vancouver a year and a half ago. And of course, people or companies reach out to us asking for introductions in Europe.
What do you see happening in the junior resource space going forward? Do you make predictions for 2020, or is there a trend that you're seeing for 2020 in the data?
I was asked that the other day as well. Like it's really tough to forecast. Like everything's trending the right direction. Like we see money inflows, we see companies raising capital. Hopefully, it leads to discoveries.
Okay.
That's really important. As I mentioned before, like we've seen less G&A financings, so companies are actually able to raise money to create shareholder value. And I think that is going to be huge. And once investors see that value is being created, and we're seeing that in early days already, like drill results are being highly rewarded right now. I think Visual Resources put out some good results today, and we're recording this on what day is it? Wednesday the 24th, right? So the investors are rewarding success.
Okay.
And once that happens more often, and once maybe we'll see a couple more mergers, we will see a really positive effect on the sector. So that's maybe my outlook for the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It seems like the resource market got punished for 7 or 8 years after 2011. It's just been really sort of desperate for a lot of companies. I know, looking at your junior mining finance index, there was a downward slope from 2011 until just recently this year. And then if you look at the performance of the junior mining indexes, they're almost mirror exactly the slope of the financing. So when the junior miners aren't getting the money, of course, they're not able to do their exploration. They're not able to get acquired by bigger companies looking for resources. So it's good to see that we have some positive, momentum in the junior resource space finally, after what seems like almost a decade of just like this sideways movement.
And when you can raise more than $300,000, you can actually create some value. You can actually start drilling. You can do a proper exploration campaign and move the company ahead and help the shareholders actually make some money and reallocate that capital at some point.
So what's next for you in your two companies? What's your focus for the rest of 2020? Can you give us a little bit?
Actually, you're catching me at an opportune time. I was just about to record a sort of a video message because we're starting our first sort of virtual conference. We're calling it SF Online. Okay. And we're marking that more into the European market. OrenInc, we're trucking along. We're tracking the financings. We're working with Kitco and other groups together to get our content out. Soar Financial, we're helping companies still stay connected to the European or the investors in general. Like our SF Live video interviews, we're going to keep doing those live on Twitter. We're hosting webinars, everything virtually right now. But God forbid we won't be allowed to travel again. But we're looking forward to November, our first physical conference in Frankfurt. We're still going ahead planning that one. If no second wave hits, I think we'll go through with it. It'll be interesting to see what the feedback is because we're contemplating a hybrid conference with virtual attendees or CEOs attending as well as physical attendees. So it's still up in the air what's happening. So we're quite excited and we're looking forward to the future.
So how do people get involved in your virtual conference? Have you set up the webpage for that yet?
We're just in the process of it. So if you go to soarfinancial.com and then click on Soar Financial Partners and go to the event site, you can follow us and you can register for our virtual event that's happening July 8th.
Oh, fantastic. So it's just right around the corner.
Oh yeah, we're doing so many things right now and there's so many opportunities in the virtual space. It's tough to keep up with ourselves. So.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, well, good. Thank you so much, Kai. I appreciate your time today. Definitely good information. I love your website. I use it, research all the time. So I appreciate you guys putting that information out there. As an investor and as somebody who writes about this space quite a bit, it's great to have that information at your fingertips. So I definitely do appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Robert. Thanks for having me on. It was great chatting with you.
Anytime.